Part 5 of Interesting Tidbits from a 1910 U.S. history book. This next part is interesting because 114 years later, it's still very applicable. The war which is waged with powder and ball is often less contrary to true peace than the war which exists while all the outward semblances of peace are maintained. We must not be misled by names. America is perhaps too prone to regard itself in a passive light, as the refuge merely of the oppressed and needy, but she has an active mission too. She stands for so much that is contrary to the ideas that have hitherto ruled the world that she can hardly hope to avoid the hostility, and possibly the attacks of the representatives of the old order. These she must be able and ready to repel. We have freely shed our blood for our own freedom, and we should not forget that. Though charity begins at home, it need not end there. We should not interpret too strictly the maxims which admonish us to mind our own housekeeping, and to avoid entanglements with the quarrels or troubles of our neighbors. We should not say to the tide of our liberties, "Thus far shalt thou go, and no further." America is not a geographical expression, and arbitrary geographical boundaries should not be permitted to limit the area which her principles control. We, who seek to bind the other nations to ourselves by ties of commerce, should recognize the obligations of other ties, whose value cannot be expressed in money. America wears her faults upon her forehead, not in her heart. Her history is just beginning. She herself dreams not yet what her ultimate destiny will be, but so far as her brief past may serve as a key wherewith to open the future, a study of it will not be idle. And that is the end of that section that was after the introduction and before Chapter 1. Part 6 of Interesting Tidbits found in a 1910 U.S. history book. Two quick notes before we get started. 1. This book was written before 1923. Therefore, it is in the public domain. You can find it on the Library of Congress's website, the entire thing scanned in, so you can go read the whole thing. I'm going to try to remember to turn the captions on, especially during the reading parts, but if you don't like my voice reading, go read it by yourself. 2. Be nice to each other in the comments. That's it. I will delete your comments if you're mean. I really highly doubt any of us are history scholars, so let's not argue about it. Okay, now on to the good stuff. Okay, Chapter 1, Columbus, Raleigh, and Smith. This is talking about Christopher Columbus, Sir Walter Raleigh, and John Smith. There were a couple interesting parts, and I'll read them to you now. There's a little blurb about the lost colony of Roanoke, and I thought it was interesting. Little Virginia Dare and the lost colony of Roanoke had already passed out of history, leaving no clue to their fate except the single word Croatan inscribed on the bark of a tree. It was the name of an island further down the coast, and had White, this is one of the explorers, gone thither, he might even yet have found the lost. But he was a man unfitted in all respects to live in that age and take part in its enterprise. He was a soft, feeble, cowardly, and unfaithful creature, yet vain and ambitious, and eager to share the fame of men immensely larger and worthier than he. The next little thing that I thought was interesting was about John Smith and Pocahontas. And this is just at the very beginning, it's talking about the great chief Powhatan and how he sent John Smith back unharmed. He sent him back to Jamestown after a few days, unharmed and escorted by 4 Indians with a supply of corn. But precisely what occurred during those few days we shall never certainly know, since we must choose between accepting Smith's unsupported story, only made public after years afterwards, and believing nothing at all. Smith's tale has charmed the imagination of all who have heard it. Nothing could be more prettily romantic. The trouble with it is, it seems to most people too pretty and romantic to be true. So this author talks about the story of Pocahontas and how John Smith was not a great guy at all. And he went to Chief Powhatan and was trying to swindle him and then whatever. So Powhatan figured it out. He was going to him, and Pocahontas was a 10-year-old girl and did not understand what was going on and threw herself on John Smith and said, "No, don't do this to him," and saved his life. And it definitely did not happen the way that Disney told us it happened. He also talks a little bit about Pocahontas herself and how she got married and then she was kidnapped and a ransom put up and paid for, and then they didn't return her, and then she married an Englishman and they gave her an English name, and then she died in London at the age of 20. But the author did say this about her. But her place in American history is secure, as well as in the hearts of all good Americans. She was the heroine of the first American romance, and she is said to have been as beautiful as all our heroines should rightly be. And that's it, Chapter 1. Come back for more. Part 7 of interesting tidbits found in a 1910 U.S. history book. Reminder, this entire book is scanned and free online. If you do read it and you notice things that are not in the online one that are in mine, let me know. But I say that because the next 3 chapters, chapters 2, 3, and 4, I'm not going to read anything from them because they are dry. Chapter 2, Freight of the Mayflower. It is what it sounds like. It's who was on the Mayflower, where they landed, what they did afterwards, and nothing stood out. Nothing was really different from what we learned as kids. Chapter 3, Spirit of the Puritans, talks a lot about John Winthrop and the Puritans and the colonies and the places that they started. And again, it's very dry, it's very detailed, and nothing really stood out as something we didn't already know. Chapter 4, From the Hudson to the Stuyvesant, which I learned is a place in New York. The whole chapter is about Henry Hudson and his escapades into like the Hudson Valley and the Hudson River, and that's why it's named after him. And again, nothing stood out to me. There was no talk of anything like salacious or interesting that has been wiped out of history. But if you'd like to go read it, you can. And I say that with all sincerity because I really do want people to go and read it, like find stuff that I missed. But really quickly, though, I wanted to talk about the author of this book. This is Julian Hawthorne. He is the son of Nathaniel Hawthorne, who wrote The Scarlet Letter, along with a lot of other novels. He was born in 1846 and died in 1934 at the age of 88. And that's it, chapters 2, 3, and 4. Fingers crossed that chapter 5, Liberty, Slavery, and Tyranny, are more interesting. Come back for more. Part 8 of interesting tidbits found in a 1910 U.S. history book. So chapter 5, Liberty, Slavery, and Tyranny, was so much more interesting than the first 4 chapters. The majority of this chapter takes place in the Virginia colony. And the majority of the colonists in Virginia, they called them planters, which is just farmers. And their main crop was tobacco. And they were pretty much at their wits' end because England had all these rules and regulations on things that they could do and not do, and how their tobacco had to be exported, and so they were just done, like, over it. And on July 30th, 1619, all the colonists came together and met to listen to a letter being read from England. In the room in which they met, in the governor's house in Jamestown, was hardly spacious enough for their accommodations. 4 unadorned walls with a ceiling that could be touched by an upraised hand. It had none of the aspects of a hall of legislature, much less of one in which was to take place an event so large and memorable as the birth of liberty in a new world. And the letter they got stated that they could do away with all their rules and regulations and they could come up with their own. And they were happy about that. And then there was a little blurb here that I thought was interesting. The wives of the planters, as well as their husbands, were capacitated to own land because, in a new world, a woman might turn out to be as efficient as the man. Incapacitated means make somebody legally competent. So at least in this time, in the colony of Virginia, women could own land. That was primarily for the production of silk. And then the chapter gets real dark and goes into slavery at the time. Slaves in the 17th century were easily acquired and were of several varieties. At one time, there were more white slaves than black. White captives were often sold into slavery, and there was also a regular trade in indentured slaves or servants sent from England. These were to work out their freedom by a certain number of years of labor for their purchaser. Convicts from the prisons were also utilized as slaves. It then goes into thoughts at that time around slaves, and it's pretty bleak. But the author does say this after, like at the end of this part of the chapter. The evils of slavery were not on the surface, but were subtle, latent, and far more malignant than was even recently realized. And remember, this book was written in 1910. I also liked this statement. How can devotion to liberty coexist in the mind with advocacy of servitude? The rest of the chapter just goes into how with each new king in England, after one dies, a new one comes in and makes all new rules and regulations for the colonies. It's basically setting it up for the revolution. Up next, we have chapter 6, Catholic, Philosopher, and Rebel. Follow along for more.